If emotional wounds were visible, this child would have bled to death before the first interview.
They automatically assumed I was this demonic little kid.
He's 12. His sister's dead. He's emotionally an infant at this point.
You know I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
Imagine if I told you the police tortured a 12-year-old boy until he confessed to a murder he didn't commit. This isn't a movie plot. It's a real story, and it will leave you furious. On a quiet Monday morning in Camden, Arkansas, a mother's screams echo down Waco Street. Neighbors rush to their front yards as 911 is called. Inside a modest gray house, an 11-year-old girl lies dead in her bedroom, plastic bags tied around her head, her hands and feet bound with measuring tape, and the family dog's leash. Within 12 hours, police have their suspect in custody. But here's the twist that will haunt you. Their prime suspect is the victim's 12-year-old brother, Thomas Cogdell, a quiet, bookish kid who neighbors describe as protective of his sister and incapable of violence. But this case, which seemed so clear-cut to police, would expose one of the most disturbing examples of psychological manipulation of a child by law enforcement that experts have ever witnessed. And what if the real killer was sitting right under their noses the entire time? To understand how everything went so catastrophically wrong, we need to go back to the beginning and meet the Cogdell family. Thomas Ryan Cogdell was 12 years old in August 2006, living in a small gray house on Waco Street in Camden, Arkansas, a town of about 13,000 people where everyone knows everyone else's business. Thomas wasn't your typical kid. His teachers were often startled by his considerable intelligence, and neighbors described him as quiet, well-mannered, and deeply bookish. He spent most of his time reading or playing video games, sometimes offering to do yard work for neighbors to earn a little pocket money. But perhaps most importantly, Thomas was fiercely protective of his younger sister, 11-year-old Kaylee. Kaylee Cogdell acted younger than her 11 years. She was vulnerable, and neighborhood mothers often witnessed other kids taking advantage of her or making fun of her, but not when Thomas was around. There's one story that perfectly captures their relationship. Once, when a bigger girl pushed Kaylee, the girl hit Kaylee back when she tried to stand up for herself. Thomas immediately launched himself at the attacker, defending his sister without hesitation. The siblings lived with their mother, Melody Jones, a single parent who weighed approximately 286 pounds and had admitted to being bipolar and intermittently on medication. Their father, John Thomas Cogdell, was stationed in Germany with the military, leaving Melody to raise the children alone. This was the family dynamic on the morning of August 7, 2006, a morning that would shatter their lives forever. It was approximately 11:45 a.m. when Melody Jones' screams pierced the quiet Monday morning air on Waco Street. Neighbors rushed outside to see what was happening, finding Melody gesturing wildly in front of her house, clearly in distress. But here's where the first red flags start appearing in this case. Red flags that police would completely ignore in their rush to judgment. According to Melody's account to police, she had woken up Thomas around 11 a.m. that morning. Together, they went to Kaylee's bedroom to give her what Melody described as a surprise, though notably, this supposed surprise was never identified or explained again throughout the entire investigation. When they entered Kaylee's room, they made a horrific discovery. 11-year-old Kaylee was dead on her bed. Her hands and feet were bound with measuring tape, and her head was covered with 2 plastic Walmart shopping bags that had been tied around her neck. Among the items used to restrain her was the family's dog leash. Kaylee had died of suffocation. Melody claimed she removed the bags from Kaylee's head upon finding her daughter, a detail that would later raise serious questions about contaminating the crime scene. While Melody became hysterical, it was Thomas who called 911 and directed police to their home. When Camden police arrived, they found no evidence of a break-in, no forced entry, no signs that an intruder had been in the home. In their minds, this meant the killer had to be someone with access to the house, someone who lived there. With no evidence of an outside intruder, Police immediately focused their attention on the two people who had been in the house that night, Melody Jones and her 12-year-old son, Thomas. But it was Thomas's demeanor that made him their primary suspect almost immediately. While his mother was hysterical and emotional, acting exactly how you'd expect a mother who just found her child murdered to act, Thomas remained calm and composed. To the investigating officers, this stoic behavior was suspicious. They interpreted his calmness not as shock or the way a child might process trauma, but as evidence of guilt. This is where we need to pause and understand something crucial about this case. Thomas Cogdell was exhibiting what's actually a very normal trauma response, especially for children. When faced with overwhelming horror, some people become hysterical, others shut down emotionally. For a 12-year-old boy finding his sister murdered, remaining calm and trying to help by calling 911 could be seen as incredibly mature and responsible behavior. But Camden police saw it as the behavior of a killer. Within hours, both Thomas and Melody were taken to the police station for questioning. And this is where the case takes a turn that will make your blood run cold. At approximately 5:30 p.m. on August 7, 2006, just hours after discovering his sister's body, 12-year-old Thomas Cogdell was placed in an interrogation room at the Camden Police Department. What happened next would become what experts later called one of the most riveting examples of psychological torture ever documented. The interrogation began with Officer Scott Wells speaking with Thomas about shared interests, video games and science fiction. This wasn't kindness, it was a calculated technique designed to build rapport and lower the child's defenses. Officer Even Zeke soon joined them, and after listening to their conversation for a while, he turned the discussion to what had happened to Kaylee the night before. For the first hour and 15 minutes, Thomas was questioned without being read his Miranda rights. Think about that, a 12-year-old child who had just discovered his sister's murdered body that morning was being interrogated as a murder suspect without being told he had the right to remain silent or have an attorney present. When they finally did read him his rights at around 6:15 p.m., Thomas asked a question that should have stopped everything. What does waiver mean? This was a 12-year-old child asking for clarification about a legal concept that many adults don't fully understand. Instead of properly explaining what waiving his rights meant, the officer told him it simply meant he was talking of his own free will, and that they hadn't made any promises or threatened him. This was a grossly inadequate explanation of the constitutional rights Thomas was being asked to sign away. Thomas signed the waiver, but he clearly didn't understand what he was giving up. For the next hour and a half, until about 6:45 p.m., police continued questioning Thomas. This portion was videotaped, and it's difficult to watch. On this recording, you can hear Thomas denying that he killed his sister 36 times. 36 times, this 12-year-old boy insisted on his innocence.
Thomas, I'm with the state police, and I've been kind of listening to some of the story that you've been telling.
Yeah.
So your sister died, and there was only two people in the house that could have killed her.
Okay.
You or your mother.
Okay.
That's the only way it can be, boy. There ain't no other way.
Okay.
You understand that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, she'd been dead about 6 to 8 hours when she was found.
Okay.
And that puts you awake at the time she was killed.
Okay.
I want you to tell me what happened.
Okay.
Will you do that for me?
Yeah.
Okay? You gonna tell me the truth this time? Did your mother kill her?
Okay, I know her.
You don't know. That would leave a man of normal intelligence to think what happened. What?
That I killed her.
That's correct. I really want to know why.
Why what?
Why you would kill your sister.
I want it.
But you had to. If your mother didn't, that just leaves you.
Well, I didn't kill her. I know I didn't.
You know you didn't.
Yes, I know I didn't.
Well, then how did she wind up like that?
I don't know. I seriously don't know. I didn't kill her.
You killed your sister.
No, I didn't kill her. I didn't.
It'll feel a whole lot better if you just tell me.
I didn't. God. I didn't kill her. I did not.
Then who killed her? to have been you, son.
I didn't do it. I didn't kill my sister. I don't want to kill her. Come on.
Well, I agree. She didn't deserve to die like that. And I don't know what your intent was. The only thing I want to know is why.
I didn't do it, okay? I didn't. I didn't kill my sister. And so anyway, I can prove that to you.
It's going to be difficult.
I didn't do it.
And why are you crying for?
Because you're accusing me of something I didn't do. You accused me of killing my sister.
I said it was you or your mother.
I didn't do it. I didn't.
But then, something happened that would change everything. After Thomas said he was hungry and asked for food, the officers stopped the videotaping and took him to a detective's office to eat. Here's what makes this absolutely chilling. The tape was turned off for more than 3 hours. 3.5 hours during which police continued to interrogate a 12-year-old child with no recording, no oversight, and no attorney present. We know from police testimony what happened during this time. Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Greg Parrish came in and spoke with Thomas for 5 to 10 minutes about school and video games while he ate. Then Officer Wells continued talking with him about video games and science fiction. Officer Zeke rejoined them and eventually steered the conversation back to Kaylee's death. According to police, they began pointing out inconsistencies in Thomas's version of events. They claim he became frustrated, and then, at some point during those missing 3.5 hours, this is backed up by interrogation footage of Melody. In the footage, it's faint, but you can hear an officer in the next room saying, "Thomas, I'm not going to ask you again." This was a terrified 12-year-old child who had been worn down by hours of interrogation. When the recording was turned back on at around 10:20 p.m., something had fundamentally changed. Thomas Cogdell, the same boy who had denied killing his sister 36 times just hours earlier, was now ready to confess. But this wasn't the confession of a guilty person finally admitting to their crime. Experts who have analyzed this recording describe Thomas as appearing broken, defeated, and psychologically shattered. He's visibly holding himself and rocking for comfort, classic signs of a child in severe distress. In his confession, Thomas claimed he had tied his sister's hands and feet to slow her down when she got out of bed. He said he put a bag over her head, then went back and loosened it later so that air could get in there. At one point, he said he put 2 bags over her head because the first one had a hole in it, and that he held them there until she started twitching.
Is there a possibility?
You two playing around and you tied her up?
It's a possibility because I don't remember if I did or not. I might not just remember. Sam, I did it. I'm the one who did that to Kaylee. It was an accident. I'm sorry. Just go along with what he said, because he said he didn't do it, and then y'all wouldn't find his fingerprint.
If he would do this once, he might do it again. And we'd have to be in fear for anybody he's around, any other child or young person, or even you.
I didn't kill my sister. I didn't kill her.
But here's what makes this confession even more disturbing. Just before giving it, Thomas whispered something to his mother, who had been brought into the room. According to Thomas, he told her not to worry, that what he was about to say wasn't the truth, and that police wouldn't be able to find any evidence linking him to the murder. After this whispered conversation, Thomas looked at his mother with an expression of concern and said, "Okay, you understand?" When she nodded, he said, "I did it." Melody Jones, who had just been told by her son that he was about to lie, simply nodded calmly. For someone who had supposedly just learned that her 12-year-old son had murdered her daughter the night before, her reaction was remarkably composed. But here's where this case gets even more troubling. While police had their confession from a psychologically broken 12-year-old, the physical evidence told a completely different story. Thomas's DNA was found on absolutely nothing connected to the crime. Not on the bags used to suffocate Kaylee, not on the measuring tape used to bind her, not on the dog leash, nothing. What they did find was unknown male DNA on the measuring tape used to bind Kaylee. Unknown male DNA that was never identified, never investigated, and essentially ignored once they had Thomas's confession. The medical examiner's findings were even more damning to the case against Thomas. Dr. Fahmi Malak testified that the fresh bruises found on Kaylee's head could have been caused by a hammer. And here's the kicker. Evidence of a hammer was found in Melody Jones's bedroom. Even more significantly, the medical examiner testified that Kaylee's death was consistent with a 250-pound person straddling the child and holding her face into a pillow. Remember, Melody Jones weighed approximately 286 pounds at the time of her daughter's murder. Thomas Cogdell was 12 years old and probably weighed no more than 100 to 110 pounds. But there's more evidence that police chose to ignore in their tunnel vision focus on Thomas. A man named Chico Spink, who was Melody Jones's boyfriend at the time, came to the police station and made a shocking claim. Spink told police that Melody had admitted in her sleep to killing Kaylee, and he provided details about the girl's death that seemed to match the crime scene. Police testified that they believed Spink's statement had been recorded, but claimed they couldn't find the recording. Some officers said they couldn't remember if it was recorded at all. The defense was never provided with this potentially exculpatory evidence. Think about this. They had a man claiming that the victim's mother had confessed to the murder in her sleep, providing details about the crime, and police essentially buried this information. Speaking of Melody Jones, her behavior throughout this entire ordeal raises serious questions that were never properly investigated. First, there's the mysterious surprise she claimed she and Thomas were going to give Kaylee that morning. This surprise was never identified or explained. What was it? Why wake Thomas up specifically to give it to Kaylee together? And why has it never been mentioned again? Then there's the timeline Melody provided. She claimed she and Thomas went to bed around 6 a.m. after staying up all night. But think about this logically. If you'd been up all night and finally went to bed at 6 a.m., would you really wake up just 5 hours later at 11 a.m. to give your daughter a surprise? During Thomas's interrogation, Melody's behavior was equally troubling. While being interviewed herself, she essentially threw her son under the bus, talking about his supposed anger problems and saying things like, "He worries me and he zones out sometimes when he gets mad." Thomas stated that his mother would get angry with him and his sister, especially if they were playing too loud, and that she would even resort to beating the both of them with objects. Despite all these red flags, despite the lack of physical evidence, and despite clear violations of a child's constitutional rights, Thomas Cogdell was convicted of second-degree murder in March 2008. The judge ruled that Thomas was delinquent on the charge and committed him to the Division of Youth Services. But the judge added a condition that would keep Thomas locked up longer than necessary. He could only be released if he admitted responsibility for what he did. Thomas refused. He recanted his confession once he spoke with his grandfather and has maintained his innocence ever since. Even faced with continued incarceration, he would not admit to a crime he didn't commit. This is where the story takes a turn toward justice, albeit delayed justice. Northwestern University's Center on Wrongful Convictions of Youth took up Thomas's case, filing an amicus brief that challenged every aspect of his confession and arrest. The center's attorneys, led by experts like Stephen Dreisen and Laura Nereter, argued that Thomas didn't understand his Miranda rights and therefore couldn't knowingly waive them. They also highlighted all the evidence that police had ignored: the unknown male DNA, the medical examiner's testimony about the 250-pound person, the hammer found in Melody's room, and the buried statement from Chico Spink. In May 2010, the Arkansas Supreme Court delivered a scathing rebuke to the Camden Police Department and the lower court. In a 20-page opinion, they overturned Thomas's conviction, ruling that Circuit Court Judge Edwin Keaton had erred in finding that Thomas had knowingly waived his right against self-incrimination. Associate Justice Robert L. Brown wrote that there was a fundamental problem with how Thomas's rights had been explained to him. When Thomas asked what waiver meant, instead of explaining that he was giving up his constitutional right to remain silent and have an attorney present, police simply told him it meant he was talking of his own free will. The court ruled that this was not an adequate explanation for a 12-year-old child to make an informed decision about waiving his constitutional rights. Thomas Cogdell was released after spending 4 years in juvenile detention facilities. He was 16 years old. Nearly a quarter of his life had been stolen from him. But here's the twist that makes this case even more infuriating and heartbreaking. To this day, no one has ever been charged with Kaylee Cogdell's murder. Think about that. The Arkansas Supreme Court threw out the only conviction in this case, essentially saying the confession was worthless and obtained illegally. They had unknown male DNA on the murder weapon. They had a medical examiner saying the death was consistent with someone weighing 250 pounds, extremely close to what Melody Jones weighed. They had a witness claiming Melody confessed to the murder in her sleep, which, admittedly, is weak evidence but deserved at least some follow-up. And yet no one has ever been arrested or charged for this little girl's brutal murder. The case was supposedly sent back for new juvenile proceedings, but those proceedings never materialized in any meaningful way. Police had their confession thrown out, their case dismantled, and their investigation exposed as fundamentally flawed, but they never reopened the investigation to pursue the obvious alternative suspects. Kaylee Cogdell deserves justice, but instead of getting it, we have a system that was so determined to close a case quickly that they tortured a confession out of a 12-year-old boy and ignored overwhelming evidence pointing to other suspects. This case has become a touchstone for experts in false confessions, particularly those involving children. Stephen Dreisen, one of the attorneys who worked on Thomas's appeal, calls it a seminal or touchstone case, and describes the interrogation as one of the most riveting examples of psychological torture I have ever seen. The Thomas Cogdell case has been featured on Dr. Phil, in academic studies, and in the podcast Wrongful Conviction, False Confessions. It's become a prime example of what can go wrong when police interrogate children without proper safeguards. Laura Nye Ryder and Stephen Dreisen, who later worked on the Brendan Dassey case featured in Making a Murderer, have used Thomas's case to advocate for mandatory recording of police interrogations and better protections for juveniles in custody. Thanks partly to cases like Thomas's, 26 states now require recording of police interrogations. But the damage to Thomas Cogdell's life had already been done. As we near the end of this story, let's consider the questions that still haunt this case. Who killed Kaylee Cogdell? The unknown male whose DNA was found on the measuring tape, Melody Jones, whose weight matched the medical examiner's findings and who allegedly confessed to the crime in her sleep. Someone else entirely? Why did police ignore so much evidence pointing away from Thomas? Was it incompetence, or were they so convinced of his guilt based on his calm demeanor that they couldn't see the forest for the trees? What really happened during those 3.5 hours when the recording was turned off? What psychological techniques were used on a 12-year-old boy to break him down so completely that he was willing to confess to a crime he didn't commit? And perhaps most importantly, why has no one been held accountable for this miscarriage of justice? The Thomas Cogdell case is more than just a wrongful conviction. It's a damning indictment of a system that failed at every level. It's the story of police officers who were more interested in closing a case than finding the truth. It's the story of prosecutors who built their case on the forced confession of a child. It's the story of a judge who ignored clear constitutional violations. But it's also the story of a 12-year-old boy who spent 4 years of his life locked up for a crime he didn't commit, and a little girl whose real killer may never face justice. Thomas Cogdell is now an adult, but those 4 years in juvenile detention, during some of the most formative years of his life, can never be given back to him. The trauma of being accused of murdering his beloved sister, of being psychologically tortured into confessing, of being abandoned by a system that was supposed to protect him. That trauma will last forever. And somewhere out there, the person who actually killed 11-year-old Kaylee Cogdell is walking free, while the little girl they murdered has never received the justice she deserves. This case should make us all question how we treat children in the criminal justice system. It should make us demand better protections for juveniles, mandatory recording of all interrogations and questioning in all 50 states, and accountability when the system fails so catastrophically. Because if it can happen to Thomas Cogdell in Camden, Arkansas, it can happen to any child, anywhere. What do you think about this case? Do you believe Thomas Cogdell was truly innocent? Or do you think there's more to the story? Who do you think really killed Kaylee Cogdell? And what changes do you think need to be made to prevent this kind of miscarriage of justice from happening again? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, because until we shine a light on these injustices, they'll keep happening. And every Thomas Cogdell who suffers, every Kaylee Cogdell who never gets justice, is a failure of the system we're supposed to trust to protect us.